So obviously thank you all for attending today. Thank you to James and Kathleen and the usual Education Estates team. It's the 11th year. Thank you all for joining us, the panellists and the audience. Obviously we've all been affected by RAAC. It's turned into the poster boy, hasn't it, really, for the ills of our estate. And it's ensured that the condition of our estate is no longer just subject to the esoteric Times Education Supplement and the Schools Week. You know, this is now a lead story for national press, whether that is The Guardian, The Independent, The Financial Times, Sky News, BBC. So we are definitely on the agenda for once, aren't we? Going into a general election year, we can travel hopefully that there may be, either for the incumbents to throw some money around at it, or subject to a change of government, there may be some more money available. But obviously, at the moment, regardless of the last National Audit Office's estimated backlog funding of 11.4 billion or whatever it was, that was subject or not subject to any inflation. It wasn't subject to the RAAC costs, etc. So I think sensibly we could probably predict north of 15 billion pounds worth of a hole there. Speak to you later, Will, about what you think in terms of the cost to decarbonise the school estate. But the Energise data that came out and other authorities have been quoting a not dissimilar figure to the 15 billion pounds worth of backlog funding. So in theory, we face a 30 billion pounds hole, and we have to accept, obviously, that government has finite funding and equally serious complaint or pressures on those limited resources to Treasury from health, from transport, from many other departments. So we've got to accept that we're only going to get a certain amount of money every year. I think at the moment, unless someone can provide a more accurate figure, we get circa £2 billion worth of annual capital investment, SCA and DFC. And at the current rate of dilapidation, the £2 billion is not really touching the sides, is it? So that, unfortunately, is our landscape, isn't it, in terms of the size of the hole and the current rate of expenditure against our current rate of dilapidation and future issues. You know, the idea of spending £15 billion to decarbonise the estate is equally predicated on the fact that our estate is in a good enough condition to want to spend that money on it as well. So they're kind of linked as well, aren't they, to be honest? So I think the reason that we're possibly going to have this conversation today is to look at alternates to the current opportunities that are available to academy schools to access funding. Obviously, we are familiar with operating leases, we are familiar with power purchase agreements, etc. But at the moment, this is what I'm going to tease out of my client side CFOs, etc. in a minute, is potentially some of the blocks to that. I think it's fair to say that in this room that there is an overwhelming appetite to want to do the right thing, but accessing the money to be able to do it is proving rather problematic. So I kind of want to speak to the client side, if I may, first. Doug, tell us about your experience in terms of access to available funding for capital works or for decarbonisation, and you, as a trained accountant, your frustration or attitude in terms of using operating leases and power purchase agreements.
Yeah, so when I first came across this was actually around catering equipment. So the school, we were outsourcing catering for the first time, and the catering company wanted to buy us catering equipment. Great, wanted to give us something. Yes, we want to go ahead. Then I got engaged in a conversation with our auditors, and obviously as an accountant, finance lease, operating lease, I was aware of that, and there'd been in other sectors some changes around latest accounting standards in terms of basically making all operating finance leases. But when I was speaking to our auditors, they're like, no, you can't do that, because they're giving it to you. You're using the main economic value life of it. We're not going to sign it off. I've spoken to some other schools, and that depends on the auditor's approach. But that's then given me, well, as an accountant, I've got to abide by this. I don't want a red flag coming from the DfE telling me off saying, why have you gone and borrowed when you shouldn't have borrowed? So that's then had a big impact on my thinking around when I begin to look at, the green agenda about solar panels. Well, the solar panel goes on the roof, I'm using its useful life. It's a finance lease, can't do it. I need to spend the money up front. And then when we come to LED, similar again. So there's a lot of these, call it spreadsheet technical barriers where, well, actually, if I go to the LED, I can probably reduce my spend on electricity each year by 20%, and there's going to be significant saving on there. But because of restrictions put in place unfairly, now I'm a qualified accountant, I now have to go and do a calculation on net value and all that good stuff to make sure I'm not bankrupting the school. But I feel as though in some areas my hands are tied, and that's the experience we've had so far. But through some conversations I've even had today, there might be ways around it.
So it's fair to say that you feel restricted by the spirit and the letter of the Academy Handbook.
Yeah, and bureaucracy.
But just to qualify that, you do have, if you could access the money, you feel confident enough that there is sufficient empirical data upon which you could draw to show your return on investment.
Yes, categorically.
Ben,
Yes.
tell me about your experience and your trust's attitudes to the same barriers.
So obviously the same barriers exist across the whole country from the Academy's handbook, and we do acknowledge that the Academy handbook must be adhered to as a requirement as part of as agreement with the Secretary of State. But the way we also look at it is that we think there's some grey areas to read between the lines. It equally says that as your first point of the handbook, you must adhere to this as a requirement. But then the next line underneath is you have responsibility for the safety, safeguarding, and well-maintained estate. We can't really do both if you're shackling us. So the way we've gone around it is we've basically gone through the handbook. We've saw the grey areas. We've seen that there's just a simple one-liner. That's all it is operating leases do not require approval from the SFA. So we've gone, that's a fantastic line. So then it's going down, finding out contractors and suppliers that can do that. These events are fantastic for those sort of things. You've got these, Sylvania, for example, and you've got other lighting companies, all there going, we can do your LED, we can do an operating lease. I would say it's probably not as simple as that, and we have found that, and we've tripped on that a couple of times. We've had some companies saying that's fine, we cannot do as an operating lease for you, but when we've delved into it, they're going to a finance company that's borrowing the money from a bank to find that. So then we're going, well, there's a term of borrowing there. It's not direct to us, but someone's going to be taking out an interest rate on that as such. So that goes down as an operating lease. So the way we found it, especially with LED lighting, we'll come on to solar in a bit, but there's very minute, with our auditors, detail that they're looking for, and really it came down to 2 points that we found, and one of them is there is no handover of ownership at the end of the operating lease, is what we found. So at the end of it, I think the terming example that I had from them was you will not own the equipment at the end of the agreement, and there was an indefinite lease hire at the end of the lease. So our auditors were happy there to say, well, you're not owning it during, you're not owning it after, and you're still not going to own it once you finish. You're still going to be indefinitely leasing it for going forward. So they say, well, at no point will you own this equipment, so it's an operating lease. And the other one was with regards to the terms of the borrowing. It is on there as a hire. You will pay a monthly hire fee rather than this will be your monthly cost. They've said because they've added literally the word hire into that, they've gone, it's an operating, it's not a finance lease. The lease is shorter than the lifespan of the equipment, unlike a finance lease. 7-year payback, for example, in the current climate, or 3 years in the current climate. Your LED lighting is supposed to be for 30 years. There's that parity. So our auditors are quite happy, and we're quite fortunate, what we might do. And the fact that they can see, yes, we absolutely have to adhere to it. We understand the Academy's handbook, but here's your loopholes. And this is how you get around that.
Thank you. David, bearing in mind the light and the grey areas here, what in your experience, as someone who's obviously operated at various high trust levels, what's your feedback?
I think the point that Doug made is really relevant. So I think I've been described as a glutton for punishment. So I've worked for 3 academy trusts and I've been a trustee of 2. So I've had experience of more than 5 sets of auditors, and there isn't a consistency in the reading of leases from audit. So you can put a lease in front of two different auditors and they will give you a different answer. And I think that's a really key problem that the sector faces, because, yeah, as you quite rightly say, Ben, we don't want to be in contravention of the Academy's handbook. That would be foolish in the extreme. But where there are differences in the perception of what actually fits and what doesn't fit, I think that is something that I find really frustrating. And even when, and I've actually had this happen at, well, not the trust I'm at now, but the previous trust I was working at, where there was an operating lease put in place for LED lighting, and it had gone through 2 audits by the same firm. That firm had been taken over by another firm, still the same auditors, but they came out with a different reading of it. And that's getting to be quite silly. You know, so if you've had auditors sign it off, you've not changed auditors, they've changed ownership, and you end up with that. That isn't an ideal situation for us to operate in.
What about thinking outside? So I have a client in Enfield who desired a sixth form college, as they didn't have the available few million to be able to fund that. But what they did manage to do was they managed to get an operating lease. They built a 2-storey building and they sublet on a back-to-back arrangement with a David Lloyd type franchise company who effectively bankrolled half or above half of the payments, and obviously by taking in the additional sixth form students, it effectively paid itself. I can imagine the challenges there with auditors, trustees, etc. But my point is that it can be done, can it, David?
So, obviously I know of the college that you're referring to, and we put that type of model in front of our trustees. We didn't even get to auditors, and our trustees had a nosebleed at that kind of arrangement. I mean, one thing I will say, and this might sound facetious, but it's not. The first trust I worked for, the sponsor was one of the first, shall we say, party political donors who got involved in academies right back in the early days of 2008-9, and that is an alternative way of funding. It's actually getting a philanthropic approach to funding buildings. So we had a guy who set up a number of endowments, and approximately, and this again caused some problems with the auditors. So we had a £10 million fund that the sponsor created from his philanthropic foundation. We then started using that funding for building projects, but we looked at always replenishing that fund. So in other words, the schools effectively will pay back into the endowment fund over a period of time the cost of the building. Now that then started causing problems, you know, sort of probably 10 years after that project started, where again it's what actually does repaying that money into the endowment fund actually mean. The endowment fund was purely for the benefit of the trust, but the fact that the money was coming out of GAG money, is it a loan, is it just a reallocation of funding? So every time you try and, Tim once called me a maverick, and I took great exception to that. It may be true. So when you think there's something which you can do, which is sensible to really do some of the things that we need to do as a sector, and it's almost like, oh, you found a good way of dealing with that, we have to put a stop to that.
Indeed. I think, so at the moment, the obvious is that we're not allowed, schools are not allowed, academies are not allowed to borrow money. However, we also know that many clients, former clients in this room, know that if they are looking to make a financial contribution towards a SIF bid, it doesn't have to come out of reserves, does it? Because there is a SIF loan available, repaid over 10 years via the Public Works Loan Board. So there does seem to be some flexibility if you wish to access government money, or money that obviously 5 years ago was at 1.18% and now it's at 5.58 or whatever. But nonetheless, there does seem to be mechanisms available where it can suit in terms of being on or off balance. The ISBL, very useful in terms of the support that they provide to professionals, school business leader professionals. You obviously assist with school resource management advisors. And the other thing I'm really interested in that Stephen was telling me about recently is about the school mark that you guys offer, which I assume is a deeper dive into how the governance and how robust the financial management of those trusts are. And so, is it beyond the wit of us to be able to, certainly with ISBL support, would be to set up a sort of Moody's type of AAA arrangement in terms of how well a trust is performing, meeting the same type of affordability criteria that would allow them access to, whether it was the Public Works Loan Board, or there are, as we all know, one particular bank that completely dominates our sector who would be queuing up to lend money at non-ocean finance 39% APR subprime rates. There are other lenders out there that in theory the ISBL could stretch to. Is that something that any conversations that have been going on behind closed doors?
Yeah, so I'm just going to set the scene a little bit here. So I'm Lee Herridge. I'm head of professional development at ISBL. So I'm kind of standing in for Stephen Morales today, who's the CEO. So I'm not kind of an expert in the area or on policy at all, but I can certainly talk about that. I think there's three main I suppose opportunities that is offered through ISBL really. I think the first is what we've touched on there is the SRMA programme. So obviously we have a contract with the DFE for SRMA deployments. So SRMA is to go into schools and work with school business managers to look at the efficiency metrics, but also how well funding is being allocated across the school. But it's very much built on the principles of ICFP, so it's integrated curriculum financial planning. And again, you may be aware of this, you may not. We've actually worked with specialists and developed a tool, it's called the ASOP tool, where you can actually enter kind of your financial information and it will calculate all ICFP data metrics for you, and it will give you kind of calculations of efficiency, how well money is being allocated in particular areas, but also can help you to identify your leadership and management structures as well. So that's a really important tool that's been added this year to the programme as well. So actually, is too much of the money being allocated to leadership and management pay? And again, the idea of both of those processes, the SRMA process and the ASOP tool that we have is, it's about having conversations. So we're not coming in and telling you, you're spending money wrong or, you're doing this right. It's about having those open conversations because every school is different and every school will allocate their funding in different ways. So they're two of the ways that we kind of work currently with the system. And the third way, as you talk about, is Schoolmark. So it's kind of a product we've just picked up or recently picked up. But absolutely right, there's a set criteria, and that criteria is then benchmarked, so you can enter your financial information and data. So and it's wide-ranging evidence, so it can be minutes from governor meetings as well. So it's not just the finance, it's the financial aspects. There's kind of set criteria, and then absolutely right. The idea is you can then end up with a plaque, a certificate to actually say. That you're efficient, you allocating money efficiently, and ultimately end up in that position where we could turn around and say, well, actually, AAA rating, AA rating, could be a long-term goal.
It's great that there is almost a proof of concept that already exists. It just needs kind of the dots being joined, really, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does.
Subject to there being any other wider appetite. Nicola and Michael both work beyond our education sector. I kind of want to tease out from you guys opportunities where you see what you are able to do in other public sector areas, whether it's social housing or health or local authority, that we currently are denied. Because I know that the idea from the client side was where we can give you volume work and de-risk that for you guys. That's banked work, and therefore there is opportunities for some sort of volume discount, some sort of rebate, some sort of added value that you guys, where you're afforded that opportunity to be able to guarantee that future work, that you can provide back to clients. So I'm kind of interested to find out what you are able to do in other sectors that we currently are unable to access.
Great. Yeah, so from my perspective, Everlast, we're a contractor that works in other sectors, commercial as well. And all of those things are dead right. So the rebate stuff, the volumetric discounts, the bulk purchasing, the early planning, all that sort of obvious stuff that sits in the opportunity sits everywhere, is missing in this sector. But the biggest thing that I think is missing is the attraction for early engagement from the supply chain. So when it's a little bit more kick and rush, when the funding's not quite secure, when you don't quite know, it's about how early you get involved, how much energy the supply chain contractors give that opportunity, and how much they really add value in terms of the solutions. So what added value could be there from for example, a roofing solution or a window solution that goes beyond just keeping the wind and the water out, just something that maybe ticks a different box for that particular school. It might be shorter programmes, it might be aesthetics, it might be some kind of attractive installation that increases in pupil numbers. There's all sorts of options that when we're focusing on absolute physical condition need, we don't get the opportunity to look at, because predominantly the funding routes in education mean that something has to be completely shot before it's looked at, and as a result of that, it's a prescriptively set out, super competitive merry-go-round of contractors that look at it with an uncertain outcome. If a proper roof or asset management programs can be introduced, which look at prolongation programs rather than replacement programs, the ability to spend money in the right areas to the benefit of and to the cost effectiveness of the school, I think are often missed.
Thank you. Nicola?
So hi everyone, I work for Shared Agenda, for those that don't know. So my personal background and our company's background is very much one of PPP, so public-private partnerships, both in health world and education world. I think if I talk about health a little bit, my word today is going to be very similar, I guess, to what you're talking about, in terms of that holistic and joined up approach. So the NHS as an organisation is constantly changing. They've recently reorganised themselves into integrated care boards, and it is just about people coming together and thinking it from that holistic point of view and system thinking. I think so we've got lots of multi-academy trusts around the table, and just making sure we're joining up, sharing lessons learned in terms of where we find those loopholes. I think there's a tendency to try and think, oh, I found a loophole, but I'm still not 100% sure, so I'll just not really talk about it. Whereas actually I think what the health sector is quite good about is like sharing that knowledge of, we have found a way to do this, and then they will share that knowledge with each other and talk about it. And then the other part of this holistic approach for me is bringing in other people. So obviously we've got, and I am not an accountant, but obviously we've got quite into the technical detail in terms of the different lease treatment. Obviously other local authorities can borrow at good rates. So again, there's a lot of good work going on with the health sector and local authorities where as part of our business case work and options appraisal, we will look at the funding routes and actually the local authority acting as banker for people, and then being able to, obviously they can secure the capital and do it on lease type agreements for the health sector, or putting the same people in the buildings together. I know the gentleman who was speaking from Scotland earlier was talking about them building leisure centres next to schools, so we're not doing that duplicity, making things more efficient. But this is a problem health is grappling with as well, in terms of they have rules in terms of how much their capital, so even some big trusts we work with have a lot of cash in the bank, but they're not actually allowed to spend it, which always sounds really perverse. They have the rules on how much their capital they can invest back into their estate. DH have been gradually, I guess, closing the loopholes in terms of how they do that, so they are also looking at creative ways of doing this. Again, I guess similar things in terms of your comment about, does it end up being an asset that you own in the end? Theirs is all around balance sheet treatment, and they've started closing down those loopholes, but there were lots of systems. They obviously have had the big PFI programs as a sort of, coming off the back of that is the 3PD development, where the private sector will come finance the building, and then the GPs, generally it tends to be primary care scale, will lease it back. Those loopholes are getting closed down, but they can still do it on things that are not technically core assets. So I think this is one of the things I would think about today. It is one of the relaxing of the rules, something about what you are and are not allowed to borrow against, rather than some blanket things. So in health, it's using their existing capital, central capital, to do sort of that core estate, the patient-facing bit, which I guess would be equivalent of some like core teaching areas, but accepting. So what can we use borrowing for, and that that can be very specific assets like your solar panels.
Thank you. Will, we've got some good news to talk about, haven't we? We've got some,
I think so.
potentially some little pilot that's going on, which may possibly signpost us as a way out of this. Could you update us on that?
Yeah, I'm here to find the silver bullet to all
Please.
these problems, obviously.
pressure.
No pressure at all. Well, I mean, I think the thing that's so, I'm Will Atley from Located. We're an arm's length body to the Department for Education. We're basically the DfE's property company. My job's about trying to unlock opportunities in the education estate and find efficiencies. I think one of the things that strikes me is that there is an enormous amount of intellectual effort spent on trying to actually fundamentally do things which, you know, you would hope that everybody wants to do. Fix leaky windows, fix roofs, make your buildings more efficient, and it just seems, you know, I'm very much speaking from my perspective rather than a DfE policy point, but you know, it seems crazy that all that effort is going into working out, can we change our light bulbs, when fundamentally, if you imagine, you can divert that into actually thinking more strategically about what you can do. So the thing that Tim's alluded to is our Net Zero Accelerator pilot feasibility that we're running at the moment. So this is a concept at this point, and it's born out of all of the issues that everybody's been talking about today. You know, there is an inability to borrow to fund any works that you want to do. There is an enormous condition need backlog. The education estate is one of the biggest emitters of carbon in the public sector. It's about a third of the total public sector building emissions. The total energy cost is expected to be almost 1.5 billion this year, up from 700 something million a few years ago. So, and you know, anecdotally, I've spoken to Truss where, you know, and I'm sure you're the same, the proportion of your total budget going to energy is increased, well, certainly threefold is what I've heard. So the purpose of the Net Zero Accelerator is to try and resolve a lot of these issues by being an easily accessible service that will help with procurement, will help with delivery and funding of energy efficiency things in the estate. You know, and I say it kind of like that because we are very much agnostic in terms of what is done. You know, there is specific programs that will look at solar panels, there are specific programs that look at air source heat pumps. The point of this is to try and say, look, actually it's not a one size fits all. You know, a Victorian primary school, what you need to do there is very different to 1960s secondary school. We're at feasibility stage at the moment. We have a live procurement, so I can't talk too much about it, but we went to the market. We've had a phenomenal level of interest from I suppose the supply market. We will be selecting 5 suppliers to work on 50 schools between now and the end of this year. The idea of that is to work out, okay, you know, on average, what is it going to cost per school to retrofit? What are the interventions that we would typically see? What are the costs and what is the payback? The point here is that unlike, you know, a grant scheme, the work that we do has to cover its costs and be repaid somehow. We're in the early stages of working out exactly how that model will look. We think there's an opportunity to combine it with existing grant regime, and also things like we're talking to OZEV, so Office for Zero Emission Vehicles, about their workplace charging scheme for EV cars, and you know there's potential for increasing the amount of grant that's available for school car parking spaces. But really the idea is to speed up delivery, address some of the kind of supply chain issues that you were talking about in terms of actually there being I suppose a consistent and to a certain extent much more secure work stream available for years to come, so you can invest in R&D and all the rest of the things. and also to a certain extent take that intellectual challenge that I talked about at the beginning off your hands. Not to take your jobs away at all, but actually to say, look, spend your time thinking about what you would do in your school rather than trying to operate in the margins and find these tiny loopholes. So we have approval from ministers and senior leadership within the DFE to run this feasibility that's going to be running until early next year. Beyond that is uncertain, but certainly from our perspective we're really pushing to see if we can roll this out at a large scale. Does that help?
Yeah, of course it does. What's interesting is that there is, again, potentially a willingness to understand that, which is going to have to be funded somewhere, and it's a question of using the data to ensure that there is adequate return on investment for whoever's going to make the investment, whoever sits holding that risk. It's a relatively sea change, Andrew. Would you concur?
So, I mean, I think going back to the days of Passaic Loan, which a lot of us will be familiar with, where there was that ability to prove a bit of payback on an intervention that has demonstrable effect on energy budget and really generates improvement. And this kind of opportunity to kind of go back to that type of regime, I think is really welcome. At the we've not talked about it, but there's a lot of difficulty with the likes of the school sector getting into public sector decarbonisation, and there's an appetite to do stuff, but just no or limited route to funding. So I think if this grows at the kind of speed you want it to, I think it could be very very well received across the sector.
Yeah, I agree. I think the Savix Loan Scheme, having been on the DFE side, is a missed opportunity. I think Bayes cut the loan scheme in replacement of PSDS, which I think is not a like-for-like replacement. And I think it's very welcome to have something back that can support schools in getting on with not just net zero but condition needs as well.
Exactly.
Because I think it was addressing condition as much as net zero.
Condition needs have got to be addressed first. In many cases, haven't they?
Well, there lays a really good point, and I don't want to get political about this, but I think bringing the strategy, condition strategy and decarbonisation strategy together is quite important.
Exactly.
And I've said before, and I'll say it again, that I think Treasury should give back money to the DFE to allocate a single strategy. This might be a bit of a kind of halfway house of that, which I think gives a bit more flexibility and latitude in the sector to do what is needed to be done.
Just to throw it out to everyone, really, why are there competing theories here in terms of why, as the school sector has traditionally, after 3 rounds of PSDS, had such a lousy return? When we account for 50.1% of the government's portfolio of the estate, why are we only getting 7%? What is the theory behind it? Is it our condition is so much better than everyone else's, which seems crazy? Is it the lack of quality of our surveys that are supporting the bids? Are we slow off the mark? Why do we get such a poor return?
Yeah, I mean, just my opinion, if I may be so bold to throw it out there. Like, I think when PSDS started was just before the pandemic. So we had the clap for nurses, and we hear about the plight of nurses and doctors and how that's kind of in disarray. And then I think it kind of got steered there very much from an emotional response. There was no school crisis. I mean, schools had their own problems during that time.
Of course.
But healthcare was so in the spotlight.
Yes.
I think they wanted to be seen to be like, yeah, but we're friends of healthcare and we're helping, which is valiant. But then someone is left behind. So that's where I kind of saw it.
Have you got any theories?
Yeah. So I think it's probably not a level playing field in terms of the type and I say this with all due respect, capability of organisations in terms of if you've got a major NHS trust with a team of sustainability people and you've got an academy trust that isn't like for like, so how can you compete in terms of in terms of bid information, generally speaking.
Yeah.
Now, I think some of that has been addressed actually, and there's been learning, and there's been in recent rounds there's been part of the funding kind of ring fence, and all of that is welcome. But I think fundamentally there's that challenge that these are different. Yes, public sector, but the public sector is very, very diverse. And back to my earlier point, the condition strategy needs to be joined up as well, and that's why I think it should be separate. I don't know if you've got a view. Sure.
Yeah, look, I think the sector caps helps the third for education, a third for health, and a third for the others. And I think that's a good move. Look, PSDS 1, from memory, was a £1 billion scheme. There were £2.4 billion worth of applications. Someone was always going to lose out. My personal view is that I don't think it should be a bid-based scheme. I think it should be, we've got the DfE have enough data to prioritise based on things like condition as well as need. And I think a lot of effort is being put into something that shouldn't. That if you are competent enough to be able to make an application, you win. There are a lot of schools, and people were saying out there, that don't have the skills or the right in-house services to be able to deliver that. And I think they're the ones that need the money the most, but they're not being able to access it. So I think the data that the DfE have, they should be utilising that better to make a better assessment of how to spend that money, rather than it being a competition every single time.
That goes back to that point that the schools or the multi-academy trusts, the smaller ones that have probably got the worst issues, are spending the time actually thinking about how do we fix the routes, and probably educational challenges may be greater there, making an assumption. So then it's like actually the amount of time that they've got to think, right, I'm going to wait to 11:59 just to submit the application, so I'm first in the queue. It just doesn't work.
I think another thing so the trust I'm currently working for is a relatively small trust, 7 schools, but it's growing to quite a large trust because it's a Catholic Academy trust. The bishop says the schools join, they join. One of the things that I've found the last 2 trusts I've worked for, this one and the one before, is as you move facility services from SLAs with the local authority into the Academy Trust, that takes all the time of what is a relatively limited resource to actually get the mind around what actually is wrong with the school. Now, whilst you're right that the DfE have that knowledge of the estates, quite often the trusts themselves don't have the knowledge of that, because they're bringing in sometimes quite ropey information from LAs as their footprint is reducing, because obviously they're losing their customer base, they're losing their staff, the services they're giving can only get less good, and that's that is euphemistic. The service is getting poorer. So the actual, if you're in a small, a medium-sized trust, it's that capacity. Then I think that, as you said, there are some improvements in that. There are, the trusts are getting their mind around that, but there's still an awful lot of SATs around. There's still an awful lot of small MATs around. So this is, as I keep on saying, this sector's only, the MAT sector's only 12, 15 years old. That is a key thing that we've got to keep remembering, and we're still in that period of transition.
Do we think there's enough support around as well? Because I think that your point about people leaving the local authorities, and I also think whilst it feels, and obviously walking around here last couple of days, it's like everybody is talking about it, but do we think there is the right expertise and support around? I think from one of our perspectives is the people who will offer to help with your funded bids tend to be coming at it, I'm going to use my holistic word again, but they're coming at it from a very an elemental perspective, so they are generally people we're finding help with bid writing our community because they want to sell you their very particular product or their LED lighting or their panels, rather than being it's someone who is a sustainability expert in what is the correct solution for you. So is there a bit of a upskilling across the consultancy sector?
When you two gentlemen talked about the fact that the DfE hold the data, I'm going to have to ask you to qualify that, because in my experience they do not hold accurate contemporary data, because every time a CDC is produced we end up going out and debunking it because it's not accurate, it wasn't invasive. So, and I guess also part of what you guys are doing, you're getting refreshed contemporary data now, aren't you? You're not relying on data that's been sitting around for any period of time.
So, well, I think there's two things. I think the CDC data provides a baseline, and I think at a macro scale, it's good. There are definitely going to be cases where, individual schools aren't, accurately surveyed or whatever. CDC 2, I think, is probably going to be an improvement, or will be an improvement on that. But I think as part of this work, we need, really rich data to make decisions, and actually to make decisions quickly, and to inform contractors about what the interventions will be. I went to a really interesting talk just before this on the Nature Park programme, and the thing that was interesting about that was actually the mapping software that they're using. So they're combining GIS mapping software with kind of the ability for all students or pupils and teachers to take photos of nature, trees or animals or whatever, to try and map where nature is and how good the education estate basically is as a nature park. But I think there's something interesting to be explored about actually, could you do something similar for condition of the estate, and is there a kind of an open source way that all school pupils, teachers, estate managers can actually put the condition of the estate and their plant and everything on an app or something, so that everybody can access it and say, well, before we make a decision on this, I've got 20 photos that are taken last week.
CDC data is publicly available now. It's just deep into, you have to go through 5 or 6 levels to get to it, and I completely agree. Promise to CPC is not to give you granular level of detail, it's to give the DfE a position on how to approach Treasury and how to spend.
But I would argue that's a missed opportunity. I would argue that by only collecting high-level data, when they did make representations during spending reviews, they didn't actually have the genuine depth to go with. If they had the genuine depth, they would ask for 20 billion and accept 10 sort of thing, rather than going and saying we've only got 8 billion and getting 4. Do you see what I mean? I think there's a missed opportunity. I understand the high-level idea of having the high-level data to work from, but actually having greater empirical evidence would make your argument that much stronger.
I think the challenge back there, Tim, is probably
the cost, upfront cost. Of course, I understand.
There is
absolutely.
But what would you do with that data? Because you, as a surveyor, would still go out and survey that building. So I think it's a fine line between how much you're going to pay for a survey
I totally
and
agree.
what value it gives. Because you still have to read your surveys, because you're not going to put your PI on the line for it, are you?
No, I agree. But as vendor, when was the last time you bought your house from the vendor survey? You didn't. You went and got a drive-by, a home buyers, or a full structural, depending which one was the most appropriate for you.
True.
And so I agree with you. One size does not fit all across this massive estate, and I totally agree that the upfront cost is going to be prohibitive. But when we get to the end of 3 rounds of collecting data, and we still have got these massive gaps, at some stage we have to question whether going for the cheaper option was in long-term the best value output. That's what I'd argue.
I think some education also needs to be given around that to schools, working across some more different trusts. I don't think they always, the exec leadership team, directors, governors, whatever, understand it, because they see that you're accepting, you put in an estate team out for a day or a week, whilst this person travels around your schools, and you get given this thing, and not right. So what do we do with it? And it's measurable to us, essentially. And I think that's where and going back to your point around support, I think there is the support, because I don't think there's the attraction for education. If I'm going to university and studying for 4 years to be sustainability, climate, I'm not going to go to the education sector because they get no money spent. I'm going to go to private sector. I'm going to go to NHS within the public, because that's where the money seems to go. I mean, as a trust ourselves, looking at it for sustainability, the only thing that we seem to be feasible option for us at the moment is an apprenticeship scheme, salary met for a junior apprenticeship sustainability measure. Well, that sounds fantastic, it's a tick in the box, we've got a sustainability measure going on in the school, but realistically, what's that person going to produce? You're going to, it's not really taking the time away from somebody else, is it? We're still going to have to sit there and manage that and make sure they're doing what they're asked.
Agree with all of that. I mean, I think if you take good estates management guide for schools, that would recommend some of the steps to take, in terms of detailed condition survey, in terms of energy data and what to do with that. But I think the gap, and you picked up on this, is the application of GEMS. There's not, that support, and actually to a new business manager or whoever it is that's faced with the GEMS guidance, where do we start? And the DFE absolutely recognise that, and they've been using the Capital Advisor programme, albeit in small numbers so far, but to use that as a vehicle to helping the trusts that need it the most, actually, in terms of starting to apply those things. And it is, like you say, getting that messaging out there that actually this is how the data should be used that exists. I mean, just back to your point about what is the data, well, you talked about CDC, there's also national open source energy data, and some of the work that has been done of actually bringing together energy and condition data is quite interesting, actually, and how that can be used for prioritising. But as Will said, it's kind of a higher level that gives you the, like, we could start with that school. That school's perhaps got an estate of buildings that could benefit slightly more ahead of that school. So it kind of helps with the prioritisation agenda, but then you still need more detailed data. Now, to me, it doesn't seem far off before, there's that link to metering, half-hour metering data, which could really, really provide a richness, actually, to the data that's already out there. And if you bring that together across the whole estate, even across the trust, actually, to have that condition and energy data blended together. And some trusts will have that. They'll have detailed condition data, and they'll have half-hour meter readings across their estate. That's really powerful to start making some of these decisions.
Exactly, because ultimately, whoever's going to fund it is going to want to base their funding on having very accurate, detailed data upon which they can make such an investment. So
I was also going to say, I think you can't reduce what you don't measure, right? So if you don't know what you're starting with, how do you know the impact of what these things can deliver? So we find it all the time, if you go into school and they get promised something and it's a carbon reduction or an energy reduction, actually what they might get left with at the end of it is something that actually costs them more money to run, and it's not providing the ROIs. So it's trying to make sure that they fully understand where they're starting, where they're going, and proving that it works. And obviously when you've got funding coming on board through the stuff that you're looking at relocated, it's easier then to get that funding and to prove that it does work and it's not a risk. It's quite straightforward.
And I think there's a huge nervousness in education about risk, and I don't think we feel educated enough to make the right decisions.
Right. Yeah.
I suppose pair that with capacity issues, because let's face it, we're not getting extra revenue funding, but even if we did, we wouldn't go, let's increase our sustainability and estates team. It's going to go to the frontline education. So actually what we concentrate on is meeting what we're accountable for, and what that is at the moment is compliance and condition, and not sustainability. I only found out today that we all have to have a sustainability lead in place by the end of next year. That's news to me. So actually, in terms of focus, that's passed me by completely.
There's just so many different priorities, aren't there?
Absolutely.
I mean, one of the things I'm interested in from everyone here today is how much appetite is there, assuming you can get this fantastic service that can offer, the solution for every school, or certainly a basket of potential options. What is the appetite for essentially some kind of loan scheme that will, because I appreciate it's more risk potentially, but it needs to be.
Tim and I were talking yesterday about actually, and I can't remember who it was, whether it was Institute for Fiscal Studies or whoever, but when they talked about the affordability of pay increases, that there was enough money in the system to do that, but that's unequally distributed in pots of reserve. So actually, going back to, I think you said something about local authority lending, why couldn't we look at some kind of inter-sector loan? So the risk of loan and working with financial institutions or anyone else is taken away, and we do something different. it feels like we've sucked out all of the innovation in a sector at the moment that should be educating people to deal with the future.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm going to say from my side, when you talk about the appetite for it, it's there. You know,
Yeah.
there's- I mean, I can just see the work we've done locally at my school recently, the impact that's had on the energy bills. You can see the paybacks there, and there's more to be done.
Yeah.
And just from conversations we've had this morning, it's actually really opened up a route I can go down. So, you know, if I can go and, you know, not spend capital on replacing lights, but I can spend capital on, you know, forward thinking or other things, now I can actually, by reducing my energy bill, use that as the payback.
Yeah.
Is something, yeah, definitely interested in.
Gents, he's phoned it open to you in terms of what your appetite is as working in trust, and you, Claire, there's an appetite there, isn't there? You want to do the
it's
right
absolutely
thing.
there, and I think if you can link it back in with the handbook to say we can do this because the benefit is the risk sits with the installer and the supplier. It's their capital upfront cost. You know, it's if you can link it back to why our governors shouldn't have that
to worry about
nosebleed about how to
and worry that the auditor's going to change and suddenly what you've done isn't
the
allowed.
appetite's there. Just make it as clear as possible as you
And do you think the appetite's there for solely measures that save money, or do you think there's also appetite there for kind of capital works that, you know, improve condition but may not, you know, may marginally save money, but, you know, it's kind of rounding?
I think if you ask, and you've got a select few around this table, that there's a huge risk aversion in the sector. So actually it's really pinpointing where the risk takers, I don't want to say risk takers, but I can't think of any
Who
better
holds
way
the
of
risk,
saying it. The more creative thinkers who are willing to disrupt the norm and utilise them well in pilot schemes, because actually we love a bit of research and we love a case study. So find those people, work with them and prove it to the rest of the sector, and the rest will follow.
I think it's data.
I think what you were saying earlier about the commonality of the data between condition and energy usage, that's got to be a starting point.
I would say that there's 23,000 schools in England. Everyone's on a different maturity journey when it comes to this. There isn't a one-size-fits-all, but what I would say around the loan scheme, if Salex came back, I'm sure a lot of people would be smiling, because I think that's the biggest missed opportunity. And it should be run in parallel with things like PSDS, because it pays itself back. It's a pot that continually gets renewed and that people can continue to access it. And it saves energy costs, it saves energy itself and carbon, and it's a win-win-win in my opinion. And taking it away, I think, it was a real frustration of mine. To answer your question directly, yes.
There's also the other angle on it, isn't there? While it's benefiting schools, there's a spin onto that. It's also about educating the pupils about what can be done and inspiring them, and the whole sustainability angle going back into the curriculum. If you're adopting measures that they can go and see and kind of, you know, educate the wider community about it as well, that's a huge opportunity.
And linked with that is the data. The data can inform those behaviours changes right at the front end.
Yeah. So to build on your point as well, so I used to utilise the Salex scheme a lot, and what people I think really liked about that was the kind of, if I put in a scheme and I say I'm going to upgrade all your lighting, it's going to save this much, and then it went to Salex, I think the schools were a lot more comfortable because they said you vet it, like you validate it, and then make sure that these numbers are right, and everything throughout a lot safer. And then when that went, and I was dealing with the schools directly.
Yeah. Can I ask another question? Sorry,
Of course, please, of course.
What about energy procurement? How much time do you spend thinking about that, and how is there appetite for a kind of, I suppose, more centralised help with that?
It's about centralised help, but definitely more around viability and options available. You know, and to talk about power purchase agreements, that's, you know, schools have got, as you said, 23,000 schools, or something. You know, that's a lot of flat roof space across the country. That is screaming out for some solar panels to generate your own electricity. You know, to have those sort of agreements made available to us, where again the installer bears all the risk, bears all the capital for costs. They've got a a solid customer for the next 7, 10, 15 years or whatever it is. You know, there's no risk to the school, but it's benefiting straight away from operational costs. You know, that's where I would look at it for utilities.
As a saving rather than as a...
But in terms of when you mention the Wild West, bearing in mind that we are deemed a commercial sector, we are not protected by Ofgem in schools. That is the Wild West in terms of how the marketing goes on about energy procurement. The big question about, you know, as part of when the school transfers from grant maintained into becoming an academy trust, it's supposed to go out and keep retesting the market. And if it stays within the local authority, I don't know where the evidence is that they've been and retested the market, to be honest. It's just the same old again, isn't it? And I guess when it was, like you alluded to earlier on, when it was 1.5% of your budget, it wasn't quite the big impact. But now it's 3.5%. You definitely want to be much more wary about what type of energy you procure, and you want to be in control of the renewals. You want to come to market much earlier. You don't necessarily want to have to go through 2 winters. You may be wiser to come to market in the summer when the rates are different. There's a lot more that schools can learn, but again, we're putting the burden on schools where their core competency is to teach, not to have to navigate, you know, unprotected, unregulated procurement routes for energy. It's madness.
But also, when you decarbonise school, you need to decarbonise the energy that they're purchasing, so there should be some sort of kind of incentive there to be buying renewable energy into the school sector. That's a massive wasted opportunity.
Yeah, it does seem cruel as well when you do have the means to help yourself, i.e. lots of flat roofs. It's like, I can put solar panels on there. It's like, can I? No. Like, you know, or anything else that you want to do. Can I fix my windows? Can I this? Can I that? Yes. Can I have some money to do it? No. Like, it's nuts.
Yeah, I think solar panels have always been a grey area, because I think at one point, do they actually do a good job many years ago, etc. And I think one of my schools, I'm going to meet next week about solar panels, but I had a quote for them. And I spoke to somebody else, and it was just a general grey, because we're just not experts in this, you know, at all. And then we're going to be putting out a lot of money we should get the return, etc. But I'm not an expert in this, and like a lot of people in schools I'm not on the teaching side either, but you know, even, you know, I'm not sure that we are getting energy efficiency. Actually, we're probably not. I know our boilers, we've got a swimming pool, we're a special needs school, so we pay out a lot for support staff because the children, you know, are disabled, and you need a lot of support staff. Then the government haven't given the extra money for the pay rises in the support staff, but we've got a disproportionate amount of support staff because we've got kids with special needs. We've got the other streams, but it just does not even kind of cut it. So we're at a point now where actually some rooms need to be a warm temperature because of the kids, and we've got a swimming pool that, to be honest, maybe should be shut down. But then it's providing such a facility to the children, but we've got flat roofs, so really the solar should really be, it's a warm pool, and when you come out the pool the atmosphere has to be warm because we've got kids with cerebral palsy, and they will fit if they, you know, if the you know, the temperature is you know, too low. And there's a lot of energy being used in one of our schools. It's not efficiently enough. It's not that, but you know, we're speaking to different people, and you think, well, actually, what are they gaining out of this? You know, while we're getting the real, you know, holistic, you know, genuine picture for actually is this long term the best thing? And the governors are like, and the trustees are like, no way you're shutting this pool. This, you know, the school's been outstanding for the last like 15, 20 years. It's an amazing pool. It's an amazing service to the children, but it's going to cost 15 grand just for a thing to go over it, just a cover for the, and then there's loads of other, and it's just, well, where do we get this money from to keep this pool open? Where's the funding going to come from? So we're just at a sticking point now where we rent out the pool, it makes money, but then, you know, what is the best way? And we need the best way, and like I said, the head teacher was on about solar panels, but we have to kind of give out kind of, I guess, a certain amount of money. We need to know that we're going to get a good return on investment.
I think that takes us back to the original CapEx challenge, doesn't it? I think what we've all seen around here is there is data to collect that could support the return on investment, but we've got even to capture the data. If we're talking smart meters or loggers on distribution boards or whatever it is we require to capture the data to prove, reduce the usage and therefore be able to measure the savings that could be made, it still requires some CapEx at the front end for that, doesn't it? And that is the problem. I think we probably amongst us can devolve a route through this But to be able to attract someone to hold that risk, they're going to want really accurate data.
Yeah.
Aren't they? But I think in terms of what you've wanted to solicit around here, there is a huge appetite here. Everyone wants to do the right thing. They would like the freedom to borrow sensibly, subject to regulations, the right borrowing rates, etc., etc. I think that's it, hopefully within our gift to lobby for at some stage, because going back to the original point, where are we going to fill the 30 billion hole from? Where's it coming from?
I think it sounds like it's safe routes to access that borrowing as well, isn't it? Because again, that time and efficiency of, you don't all want to go and have a separate conversation with someone about doing that. If there is a DFE backed or just brokered route into accessing that in a safe way, that probably feels like the.
Well, it's like having a remit. Also, you're going from trying to be an investment bank on one side, trying to strike the best deal, through to making sure the lights turn on. That's a very wide job remit, and you need guidance and help out there to get that done.
Yeah. Any final comments from anyone?
I've got one for Will actually. Will, how does the accelerator differ to the old sale extend scheme?
I mean, I think it's focused just on education. I think it's loan and delivery. So the idea is that it's providing the funding, but also helping with actually delivering the work. I mean, those are the main things that we're kind of focusing on. I think nothing that we're doing or looking to do is kind of reinventing anything fundamental. We're talking about basic building fabric, we're talking about solar panels, LED lighting, that kind of thing. But I think the ambition is to really make a market impact on the existing estate, and actually try and make it work for that massive middle band of schools where they're not falling apart, as someone said, that they're not about to fall down, but also there are those few schools that are performing really well. So yeah, those are the main kind of aims of it.
Guys, anyone else want to make any more comments in terms of what we've discussed, what progress we've made? It seems to all be roughly on the same page. We seem to be able to identify the appetite and the will to it. I guess, Andrew, you'll be well placed to lobby those that need to hear our song.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely that need for more investment, isn't there? And I think that's recognised, particularly on the back of RAC and your opening remarks, Tim, I think. Summed it up, and it was mentioned yesterday that 40% of the estate built between 1940 and 1960, and either at the end or approaching end of life, and that's the real challenge, isn't it? So yeah, lots to be done, and things like we talked about this morning will help. You're not going to get all the money. We know that, but it's just being able to help and have make the right decisions. That's the biggest challenge, I think, for Multi-Academy Trust, is being able to have the help to make the decisions and the data to make the decisions in the right way.
I think I'd completely echo your point earlier about not separating out everything under the sustainability net zero carbon umbrella from condition and from sufficiency and from suitability, because we've mentioned the funding side that all these things operate in silos, and I think it's just we need to, and that will again make that big pot or hole bigger. But I think if we understand the size of it, you can then revert to chunking it up and saying, right, well, here's some funding that can help with this part of it. But unless you've joined it all up together at a strategic level, you're only ever going to be piecemeal of sticking plaster.
It's a basic example, but you don't want to invest in PVs on a roof that you find you've got to replace next year, because you've not been able to join that up.
Well, I've spoken to schools who've got PSDS funding as an example, but actually it doesn't work because the building isn't insulated properly. So it's like, well, it's a challenge, isn't it?
There's a lot of PDS funding being handed back.
I know, exactly.
And I think that's probably sloping into a point I was going to make, that I wonder how long it will be before the DFE and the government evaluate the value of capital funds and the allocations that they've made. And I think what struck me the last couple of days is, and somebody said it here earlier, we've got small trusts who don't necessarily have the expertise to bid into the SIF well. Equally, we've got large trusts where small trusts have an ambition to become large because suddenly we get our own capital funding, but then you've got large trusts saying that actually that doesn't work for them because it's never enough and they're excluded from bidding from SIF. So, you know, I think we're in a bit of a mess, quite frankly.
Indeed. But so in terms of feedback heaven forbid. In terms of your feeding back, in terms of, you know, potential funding route via the Zero Accelerator, I would hope that events like this gives you
really helpful.
Live, you know, direct, look at people in the eye telling you that there was a massive appetite there.
Yeah, I mean, really helpful. I mean, from my personal perspective, we're really pushing this to try and get as much traction as we can, as quickly as we can, to I suppose just demonstrate that there is that weight of demand from schools, but also demand from, I suppose, the suppliers to actually want to work on this kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, we see the opportunity. We're having a lot of conversations, and the interesting thing as well that has been alluded to is this isn't a unique problem for the school estate. You know, other government departments have got similar issues. Potentially, it's easier to manage a health estate than a school estate because it's kind of more centralised. But yeah, I think there is a weight of interest, and it seems to me that people are starting to wake up to the issues a bit more.
Yeah, is it possible as well? So, like, there's a new process coming in, a new scheme, and a new way of borrowing or anything. But in the short term, because some schools are really struggling, is it likely that there's ever going to be an announcement that says that operating leases are kosher, and here's why, and this is how you should be reading the Academy's handbook, and taking the sort of kind of emotion out of it in terms of like how people read it, like as a kind of like there needs to be something better, but there also needs to be something fast. So is that a possibility? Like, I don't know if I'm sort of opening out to the right question.
If I'm honest, that's kind of beyond my.
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
I think it's a treasury issue as much as a DFE issue. I think so. You know, the whole point is about not increasing government debt. So yeah, it's certainly beyond me and probably a lot of DFE officials as well. So, but I think, you know, we're talking to other government departments who are having similar issues. You know, DLUC is having similar things with social housing because, you know, how do you improve the quality of social housing when, you know, even with private landlords or RPs it's a similar issue. So yeah, I think at some point it's going to be knocking on Treasury's door to try and unlock some of these issues.
Right, thank you. Unless anyone's got any final comments. Thanks for coming today, for all of your contributions. Really useful.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Tim.
Thank you. Thank you. Cheers. Thanks.
Tim, the way you chaired that meeting and convened a really great cross-section of people interested in the education estate was great. I thought you directed the conversation really well, and actually the structure of it was really helpful to get people thinking the right way.